really about Edna developing her own identity, especially when set against the characters of Elsie Robin, her husband, and even to an extent Robert LeBrun. So make sure, because this is a separate component, that you attend to the detail. Chapter 24 is a significant turning point in the novel for Edna. However, indirectly, so at least in the beginning, because it starts with Leonce, her husband, seeking advice from Edna's father. Now, I highlight this because, again, like I said right before the change in this, putting these two men together is really just an example of what's holding Edna back. And the discussion that the two men have is incredibly important. So I think that's incredibly significant for you to pay attention to. So if I go right to the first chapter, or first paragraph of 24, Edna and her father had a warm, almost violent dispute about the subject of her refusal to attend her sister's wedding. So Edna will not go to her sister's wedding. This is significant to the novel because of what Chopin does with the idea of marriage, how it's confining for a woman. It's very much locking Edna into that mother-woman role. So I find that significant. It says 2 lines down, the colonel reproached his daughter for her lack of filial kindness and respect, and her want of sisterly affection and womanly consideration. Pardon me. Look at the language used to describe Edna's refusal to go to the wedding. The lack of filial kindness and respect, and her want of sisterly affection. So Dad's trying to play the guilt card on Edna for not going to her sister's wedding. But immediately after this, I think something much more significant. Mr. Pontillier followed him closely. He meant to stop at the wedding on his way to New York and endeavor by every means which money and love could devise to atone somewhat for Edna's incomprehensible action. So Leonce immediately steps in and says, I have to fix what my wife is screwed up. Clearly, we see that Leonce and Edna are not on the same page. In conversation with Edna's father, Leonce brings it up, and Dad says, or the colonel says, authority, coercion are what is needed. Put your foot down good and hard, the only way to manage a wife. Clearly something here that is terribly wrong, doesn't fit with any other ideas in the novel. So this is going to absolutely separate Edna from these two men. Maybe even we could call it a breaking point. If you go to the top of page 73, Edna seems unfazed by this show of uncontrolled masculine power. But after all, a radiant peace settled upon her when she at last found herself alone. When she's away from all this, when she's free to experience her awakening, this becomes significant. When Edna was at last alone, next paragraph, she breathed a big, genuine sigh of relief. A feeling that was unfamiliar but very delicious came over her. She walked all through the house, from one room to another, as if inspecting it for the first time. It's like she's awakening further and she's beginning to see the world through new eyes. And really, that's the note I would put down for page 73, is that she's got a new vision of the world as she's shed a lot of these sort of garments. I'm saying that on purpose, but later. As she sheds this garment of masculine control, she really evolves, sort of develops as a character. Chapter 25 we find significant because now Edna is going to engage in typically male behavior. She's completely challenging and defying the traditional female role. So if I go to the third paragraph of chapter 25, hang on, She went again to the races, and again. Elsie Arobin and Mrs. Highcamp called for her one bright afternoon in Arobin's drag race car, basically is what it is. Mrs. Highcamp was a worldly but unaffected, intelligent, slim, tall, blonde woman in her 40s with an indifferent manner and blue eyes that stared. Was Edna described as having blue eyes early in the first couple chapters? I don't remember. But maybe comparing Edna to Mrs. Highcamp is of significant value. I don't know. Maybe something to attend to. It goes on further in that paragraph. His manner was quiet and at times a little insolent. He possessed a good figure, a pleasing face, and I highlighted this, not overburdened with depth or forethought of feeling. So it seems that we're describing Elsie, and he's not too smart, but really attractive. And for Edna, as she's struggling through all of this seems to be a big piece for her as a character. I move further, and I'm trying to decide if this is exactly what I want to cover. We notice in a general sense on 75 that Edna's starting to act like her father, and I think that kind of makes her nuts. As this sort of speeds up her willingness to move away from the ideas that she's been currently engaged in. So 25 is really looking at Edna by comparison and sort of what we see about her and what's significant about her as a character. So I just popped over real quick to look at my slideshow to make sure I'm covering everything I need to do. Chapter 26 really is where Elsie puts the moves on Edna. If we look at the third paragraph on 79, there was nothing which so quieted the turmoil of Edna's senses as a visit to Mademoiselle Reisz. It was then in the presence of that personality which was offensive to her that the woman, by her divine art, seemed to reach Edna's spirit and set it free. So Edna, up until chapter 28, resists Mademoiselle and all of her influences. But she seems primed. She meets Elsie, she's filled with emotion, and Mademoiselle Reisz absolutely puts her back into perspective and back into shape. So I would pay attention to that further as you went through the text. On 80, she drinks some brandy. That's not really what I care about, but it says, "I will take some brandy," said Edna, shivering as she removed her gloves and overshoes. She drank the liquor from a glass as a man would have done. Then flinging herself upon the uncomfortable sofa, she said, "Mademoiselle, I'm going to move away from my house on Esplanade Street." Look at how she acts as if she's a man. And it is in this moment that she stands up for herself and says, "I'm moving out. I'm going to go to the Pigeon House. I'm going to go into our guest house, and I'm going to set myself free from the traditional family role." I marked that specifically as the second large paragraph on page 80 as being significant. And I don't know if you can see it, but over here I even wrote significant with a question mark because I think that's a huge idea. I think it's also significant if you move down a couple of paragraphs. Mademoiselle Reisz calls Edna out on it. She says, "That is not your true reason, ma belle. There is no use in telling me lies. I don't know your reason, but you have not told me the truth." Edna did not protest or endeavor to justify herself. And then she says, "The house, the money that provides for it are not mine." Isn't that enough reason? So Edna stands up for herself. And she says, "I need my own sense of identity. I need my own specific sets of wants and desires." I think that is your significant marker for chapter 26. Again, I would go through and develop that as a significant idea. The chapter really ends with the letter from Robert. Now, it's not the letter because that's going to come a little bit later. But what I think is significant here is Edna's fine. She's moving on. She's got this boy toy Elsie, who's helping her awaken and feel all wanted and crazy. And then she finds out that Robert sent her a letter, and she kind of falls apart. This is a sort of a chink in the armor, a dent, if you will, in Edna's facade. Really kind of puts her in a position where this is strange. This is going to really have a profound effect on her as a character. I go right in the middle of the page, and it says, "If I were young and in love with a man," said Mademoiselle, turning on the stool and pressing her wiry hands between her knees as she looked down at Edna, who sat on the floor holding the letter. "It seems to me he would have to be It seems to me he would have to be some grand esprit, a man with lofty aims and ability to reach them, one who stood high enough to attract the notice of his fellow men. It seems to me, if I were young and in love, I should never deem a man of ordinary caliber worthy of my devotion." So right there on page 82, Mademoiselle Reisz calls Robert out as being simple, as he's not really worthy of the kind of character that Edna is going to need to feel fully fulfilled. Now, I find this to be really significant to the development of what occurs in the novel. So, absolutely attend to that as a significant concept. Now, again, that's going to be on 82 and the top of 83 in your text. "What is the matter with you?" in chapter 27 asked Elsie that evening. "I never found you in such a happy mood. Don't you know the weather prophet has told us we shall see the sun pretty soon?" I always find this funny because we call weathermen weather prophets when they're wrong more than half the time. Kind of an interesting little thing. "So, well, that ought to be the reason you couldn't give me another if I sat here all night imploring you." He sat close to her on a low table cushion, really. And as he spoke, his fingers touched her hair that fell a little over her forehead. She liked the touch of his fingers through her hair and closed her eyes sensitively. Hopefully you guys are suave enough to realize that he's putting the moves on her and she's not resisting it at all. Really part of her physical and emotional awakening is that she's moved beyond Leonce, and she's now experiencing all these feelings to be attracted and wanted. I don't know how good this is going to be for Edna 27 chapters into the novel. So, again, I would note this in chapter 26 so that you have a real clear concept. Wrapping up this particular segment of your lecture here, just to make sure that we have all the information. Chapter 27, third paragraph, fourth paragraph. "One of these days," she said, "I'm going to pull myself together for a while and think. Try to determine what character of a woman I am. For candidly, I don't know." Right there, and mine's yellow and pink, right here at the bottom of 83, chapter 27. This is Edna's Bildungsroman. This is where Edna says, "Oh my God, what am I going to do? I have to figure out my own life." So 26 and a half chapters to get to this particular point, but this is where Edna really embraces the fact that she's going to have to change. And of course, the male comeback is, "Why should you bother thinking about it when I can tell you what manner of woman you are?" His fingers strayed occasionally down to her warm, smooth cheeks and firm chin, which was growing a little full and double. So, besides putting the moves on her, right at the top of 84, Chopin notes that Edna is growing a little plump. She doesn't need to maintain this sense of attractiveness for her husband. It's not a negative thing. Culture typically looks at full-figured women as being healthy, as opposed to the stick figure model-esque women that we see on television. So really, really an interesting idea. There's a reference at the end of chapter 27 to Mademoiselle Reisz. But look right in the middle of the page. Well, for instance, when I left her today, she put her arms around me and felt my shoulder blades to see if my wings were strong. This is like the fourth or fifth reference to bird imagery. Edna needs to grow her wings. The awakening is her growing her wings, and that's a symbol for freedom. So specifically, look at those ideas. Specifically, indicate that in your text so that you understand. The last paragraph of chapter 27. It was the first kiss of her life to which her nature had really responded. Edna is primed and completely ready for this new life and this new romance. Very quickly, in just the course of what we're doing in the last basically 16 minutes and 15 seconds, Edna has completely and fully burdened as her own character. So please attend to that as significant in the development of the text. Now, that's going to be walking through the text through chapter 27 with the significant elements. I would do the same thing in class, but I've decided to break these into smaller consumable chunks so that you'll be in better shape. So make sure you complete the lesson as directed, and all should be terrific.